that I didn't have my ducks in a row because I had brought in, I mean, it was just special times, right? During COVID, I had brought in like an evidentiary binder for each juror, which is what we were supposed to do. I brought in like 6 different witnesses that testified on behalf of my client. And so when he said I didn't have my ducks in a row, it just didn't sit real well with me. So I got very quiet. And when I got up to give my rebuttal closing, and I said, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I am offended. I said, I am offended that my opposing counsel would argue that I don't have my ducks in a row. And then I just went silent for a second. And I said, he didn't even bring any ducks. Really loud. The judge like lost it, started laughing. One of the jurors was like laughing like out loud, really like could not hold his composure. It was really just one of those like great moments. So afterward, after we got a great result, the client brought me a huge stack. It was like a bag of rubber ducks, and they're all wearing different things. I have like a Batman rubber duck and all sorts of different characters of rubber ducks. And he said, I guess you did have your ducks in a row, and I loved it. So it's just been like this fun story to tell.
So you've done over 100 bench and jury trials. And I was welcome to another edition of the Trustcast Show, and we're really excited to have with us Amy Bradley. Amy, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. Pleasure to be here.
So Amy was an Emmy-nominated TV investigative reporter covering a case where 5 bodies were dug up in a man's backyard, and it made her want to go to law school. Now she's a catastrophic injury attorney who's tried over 100 cases, secured a $5.4 million wrongful death settlement, and uses a secret weapon. She used to work for the insurance company she now goes up against. I really blew that on the way into this podcast, so I knew I was going to stumble again.
You nailed it.
Okay, so opening question. You were covering the Hugo Selenski trial, where bodies were buried in a backyard, a prison escape with bed sheets, and that's what made you think, I should become a lawyer?
So that particular person, that defendant, had a multitude of cases actually pending against him. What made me want to go to law school is that I was covering the trial of basically he was on trial for killing 2 drug dealers and burying their bodies, basically the burned remains of their bodies in his backyard. So yes, covering that trial along with a couple of others, one civil trial actually too, is actually what made me want to go to law school.
So how long ago was that?
Oh gosh, well now you're going to test my memory.
Oh.
I retired, I call it retiring, from reporting and went to law school in 2007. So it probably would have been between 2005 and 2007 that I was covering that particular defendant, and Hugo Selenski.
I do remember that at least the prison break, and I seem to recall the bodies buried in the backyard because that's kind of unusual.
It was nationwide news, especially, the escape was so crazy because he was able to do that going head first. I believe he went out, I don't remember for sure, but the 5th floor, maybe the 7th story of the jail, head first, down bed sheets tied together. And I thought, man, you have to have a lot of gumption to do something like that. In addition to obviously the charges that he was also facing.
Yeah. So you grew up in Wyoming, went to Mizzou for journalism, ended up reporting on WBRE TV in Pennsylvania. What was it about the courtroom that pulled you away from the anchor desk?
What I loved about sitting through these trials, gavel to gavel, is that it's long form storytelling. And I love telling stories. That's what I get to do as a lawyer as well. But I get to do it in a way that's meaningful and actually makes a difference in people's lives. And so it was the idea that I was going to be academically and intellectually challenged on a daily basis that really intrigued me and got me very interested. And for the first time ever, thinking about going to law school, was sitting through these trials, it's kind of funny. I wonder if the news directors that I used to work for ever think, maybe we shouldn't have put her on the court and crime beat.
So after law school, you went into George Mason and you went to work in-house for one of the country's biggest insurance companies. What did you learn behind the curtain, so to speak?
So what I learned doing insurance defense is that plaintiffs' attorneys have a huge advantage. And our advantage, whether or not we decide to take, sort of advantage of that advantage, is that we get time. We have a lot of time to work up our cases. And, especially especially like the firm that I'm currently working at and love, we take a relatively small caseload in comparison to the insurance defense attorneys. But I have the case from the moment that the client walks in my door, which usually is pretty shortly after something horrible or catastrophic happens. So what that gives me the luxury of is a whole lot of time to start investigating and getting the evidence as quickly as I possibly can, as close in time to the crash as possible. Whereas I feel like a lot of times the insurance companies, obviously they hear about the claim. And, certainly in trucking cases, for example, they'll send a team of investigators. They'll have people on the crash site. But regular automobile accidents, there's nobody going out to investigate that, not generally. And so we have the luxury of time, and we also have resources. So I can send a private investigator that I hired, to go track down witnesses. I do it all the time. And having all of that evidence very quickly in our hands gives us a definite advantage over, the defense. We also have smaller caseloads, so I'm regularly able to outwork the defense attorneys.
So don't they usually bring a bunch of lawyers to it, or for them they're just trying to minimize as much as they can? They know they're going to get whatever they're going to.
It depends on the type of case. For products liability cases, oftentimes, I think the last one I did, which was in active litigation, we had something like 7 attorneys on the other side, maybe even 9. That being said, though, we had a team of 4 attorneys here at the office working on it. So we might be outmanned. And, the thing that I say is more isn't always better, right? Because then you might have too many cooks in the kitchen.
Yep.
So, I think we really have an advantage, especially here at Blankingship and Keith, because we get to work in teams. I'm always working with someone else on a case, usually multiple other people on a case. And so it's like you get, the teamwork is dream work, right? You get more ideas, more thoughts. And we've got some really creative people. So it's a lot of fun.
So you're a partner or a principal in the firm, right?
Yes, I am.
Yeah. Yes. Okay, so when you switched to the plaintiff side, how did insurance adjusters react when they realized you knew what their playbook was?
Well, I mean, I think that any good plaintiff's attorney who's been doing this work for some amount of time, I think that they figure out sort of I'll call it the chess game that's going on. So I think that what it gave me was some perspective on what they're dealing with, as well as I certainly know about what the defense attorneys need from you, right? They have to make regular reports to the insurers. They also really need hard numbers. Hard numbers are really important to the insurance companies. So I think there's certain things that I know, and I try to, I'm very free about sharing any secrets that I might have, with other plaintiffs' attorneys. And I think that over time, I think most, even plaintiffs' attorneys, hopefully figure out sort of what they need to do in order to combat the defense. I think that I'm lucky because I sort of have this insider baseball that maybe I know things that I don't even realize that I know, and am always anticipating what the defense is going to be arguing. And I think that is an advantage for sure.
So what's something that insurance companies do to undervalue claims that most people would never catch without an attorney?
That's a tricky question. When you say underwrite, explain your question a little bit more to me.
To undervalue a claim.
To undervalue.
What they do to undervalue a claim that most people who don't have an attorney just would oh, okay.
Let me put it this way. I've seen cases where someone has suffered a skull fracture And the insurance company thought that they were going to settle that for $50,000. I mean, that is preposterous. It is absurd. Anytime you've got a skull fracture, you know that you have a traumatic brain injury that's going to have long-lasting repercussions. But the problem is that the regular old Joe on the street, these are our clients. They don't know that, right? And so they're like, well, I think I've made a pretty good recovery. I seem to be doing okay. I don't think this thing, I don't think that it's going to affect me down the road. I really don't know. So they might think, oh my goodness, I only spent $5,000 out of my pocket, so $50,000 might sound really good. The problem is that it's not good. It's terrible. That would be a terrible offer to accept in a skull fracture case. And, it's really just what you don't know can hurt you. And so I really always tell people, and I'm very honest with folks that call, I'm not always going to be a value add, right? If you have a soft tissue case, meaning you have some sprains and strains and nothing long lasting and you've made a full recovery, you may not need me, right? You might be able to settle with the insurance company. I'm always going to tell you that. Because if you don't need me, then certainly don't give me, don't hire me. So then you have to give me part of your funds. That's not fair to you. Mm-hmm. I think you have to be honest. And I'm probably honest to a fault.
Well, I think that's a good thing. Because lawyers frequently get black eyes for not being forthright.
Yeah.
Particularly, injury attorneys. So that's a good thing. So you secured a $5.4 million settlement in a wrongful death case from a high-speed crash. I'm having some real linguistic problems today. What made that case so complex?
I was just going to say, those happen to all of us. It happens to me daily. So I would just like to make sure that it's clear. I was part of a team that got a $5.4 million settlement on a wrongful death crash. I certainly could not have done that by myself. And, my law partner was actually lead on that. So I don't even like taking credit for it. It was such a tragic set of circumstances that led to that result. And we worked the heck out of that case in order to get that result. And now, Zane, I don't remember what your question was. I apologize.
Oh, what made the case so complex?
It was very complex because the individual that was at fault for the crash had just gotten off a plane, landed at Dulles, and was in a rental car. The rental car, he was driving it at excessive speeds, well over 100 miles an hour, went over a huge grassy median and collided head on with a taxi cab that was carrying a wonderful man who his estate was our client. And just a wonderful family, a wonderful man. And what made that case really tricky is that in order to be able to ensure that there was enough insurance to make that family whole, we had to go after the guy that was driving, and it was a Challenger, which is, it's like a speed car. And we had to say that not only was he not only do we have to prove that he was within the scope of his employment, but, a real argument would have been that he, in driving in that way, right, was not driving for the company. It was something like 11 o'clock, midnight at nighttime. So it was definitely an uphill battle. And in order to be able to basically get all of the parties to the table, you have to be able to have enough evidence to scare them that if we went to trial, we could prevail on that. And obviously the fear, and that's why people end up coming to the table, I should say companies end up coming to the table, is that, we could certainly have exceeded, if we were to try that case, $5.4 million in a courtroom. Right.
So you wrote an article called Trucking Cases Are Different for the Maryland Bar Journal. How are they different?
Oh,
am I surprising you again?
No, I'm impressed by your investigative skills. Have you ever been an investigative reporter?
No, but I usually do surprise people when I interview
them. So the thing that's different about trucking cases is that unlike like a regular auto case or, a small, what you might consider to be a smaller crash, the trucking companies have basically endless resources, the deepest pockets. Most of the time there are towers of insurance. Those towers of insurance, they want to hide from you. So from the very beginning, they get a team of investigators, boots on the ground at the crash site. At that point, usually you have either people who are catastrophically injured and in the hospital, can't speak for themselves, or you have, heirs of whoever has died in the crash. And they're basically just trying to keep their heads on straight, right? So their first thought is certainly not, geez, I need to go get an attorney today, right? It just doesn't happen. So we are already at a disadvantage by the time the client walks in our door and retains us as an attorney to get working on the case, because the trucking company has already had investigators on the scene looking at things like telematics, black boxes, all sorts of evidence and data that's available in these trucks. And so you're right off the bat, you're at a disadvantage. And so you really have to have an attorney and a team. You really should have a team of attorneys working on your behalf, that are able to get their boots on the ground as quickly as possible, and start working quickly. There's so many different, different ways that trucking cases are just fascinatingly different. So you have sometimes broker liability, shipper liability. You might have different insurance for the trailer that you have for the tractor. So you really have to start digging right away and kind of collecting your evidence and your data, in addition to all the regular things you have to do in any kind of wrongful death or personal injury case.
So walk me through a day in the life kind of video. You used one to help win a $2.3 million settlement. What is that, and why does it matter?
You're asking about the day in the life videos?
The day in the life videos, yes.
So
what are they, and why do they matter?
I am not normally using day in the life videos, but what I do very routinely is on cases that are going to support that kind of an investment, a cost. I will hire a company, or I will go conduct the interviews myself of family members, witnesses, police officers, anyone who has relevant knowledge about the crash. And I like to put that together in a story format, not really unlike what I used to do when I was doing broadcast journalism and going out in the field and doing what we would call a story, and then bringing that all together in a way that makes sense and really tells the story. Because I think what gets lost in what we do all the time is the human component. So we're not representing, we're not a case, right? We are representing people who have been through terribly tragic circumstances. Either, a lot of times we're dealing with traumatic brain injuries. It can be paralysis, obviously loss of life. And so every one of those people, there's a story to be told from their lives, who they were, how this has affected everyone around them, including themselves. And then, it's sort of like the before, who they were before, who they are now, and then what does their future look like if they are lucky enough to have a future. And so storytelling is probably the most important thing that we do as lawyers. And I think it's like the number one thing that I think we forget to do, or a lot of attorneys forget about.
So what do you think that your background gives you kind of an advantage in that field, having been a professional storyteller?
I think so. Because every story has a beginning, a middle, and an end, right? And I think that one of the things that I was taught at Mizzou is to humanize every story, right? So we could be doing a journalism piece on anything. And part of what we were taught through the Missouri method is that every story has a human impact component to it. And so if we were going to go do a story about a factory shutting down, it wasn't that the factory was shutting down. It's like, go interview Bob Smith and find out how this factory shutting down is going to affect him and his family. Then go to his house and talk to his kids and his family, who now doesn't have the breadwinner, right? Or they have their breadwinner, but they don't have, he doesn't any longer have a way to make an income. And so I do think that that background and that training, and then also just like, I have no fear, like I'll go talk to anybody about anything. So like, we used to call those man on the street interviews. So basically,
Yeah.
I hate to say it, but it's like when you are putting your microphone in someone's face and asking them questions. And so I think that the combination of those two things, not really having fear about talking to people or tracking people down, in addition to, really understanding the human component of stories, I think those do give me an advantage to, for example, someone who has a, finance background. So yes, I think it's been very valuable to me.
Okay, so here's some fun rapid fire questions that might even surprise you too. Favorite hike you've ever done?
Oh, definitely. I went this year to Patagonia, and I hiked Torres del Paine, and it was basically breathtaking, unbelievable.
News anchor or trial attorney, which is harder?
Definitely a trial attorney.
Okay. What's on your desk right now that isn't legal related?
I have a magnet that says, "Wherever you go, whatever you do, may the luck of the Irish be with you."
Ah, so this is apropos this time of year, isn't it? With St. Patrick's Day.
Right around the corner.
Yeah. Best courtroom movie or show? I love to ask that one for attorneys.
Ooh, I love The Rainmaker.
Okay. One thing you'd change about the civil justice system tomorrow?
I think that the civil justice system has some flaws, certainly. And one of the things that I think hurts is the delay. It's definitely gotten better after COVID. After COVID, there were massive delays. You couldn't get a trial date in some places for a couple of years. So I really wish there was a way to speed things up. I think that that would result in quicker justice for families, and I think that that would be well warranted. But there's probably a million different things that I would change.
Okay, here's one. What's the story behind a client gifting you rubber ducks after a trial?
Well, if my camera were just slightly turned, you would see that all those rubber ducks are on a shelf behind me. So it was so funny. I had the first jury trial in a somewhat rural Virginia county after COVID. And so it was really interesting. I had to do voir dire, which is jury selection, at town hall because everyone had to be seated 6 feet apart. And we did that, and then we all got in our cars, our individual cars, and drove over to the courthouse once the jury was picked. And the day was just, I thought it was going to be a 2-day trial. Ended up getting all the evidence in one day. And in closing argument, this is where the ducks come in. In closing argument, my opposing counsel argued that I didn't have my ducks in a row, and that if I did, my doctor would have known about X, Y, and Z. So I was a little offended by his commentary that I didn't have my ducks in a row because I had brought in, it was just special times, right, during COVID. I had brought in like an evidentiary binder for each juror, which is what we were supposed to do. I brought in like 6 different witnesses that testified on behalf of my client. And so when he said I didn't have my ducks in a row, it just didn't sit real well with me. So I got very quiet. And when I got up to give my rebuttal closing, and I said, "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I am offended." I said, "I am offended that my opposing counsel would argue that I don't have my ducks in a row." And then I just went silent for a second. And I said, "He didn't even bring any ducks." Really loud. The judge lost it, started laughing. One of the jurors was laughing out loud, really could not hold his composure. It was really just one of those great moments. So afterward, after we got a great result, the client brought me a huge stack. It was like a bag of rubber ducks, and they're all wearing different things. I have like a Batman rubber duck and all sorts of different characters of rubber ducks. And he said, "I guess you did have your ducks in a row," and I loved it. So it's just been like this fun story to tell.
So you've done over 100 bench and jury trials. And I would start off with a different question there, or to go with that. But now my question is, do you think having a relationship with the jury makes a difference in the outcome? So a friendly relationship with the jury.
I think it's everything. I think, the jury is not supposed to be judging you. Right? They're not. They're supposed to be saying, look at the evidence. But if the jury really doesn't like an attorney, it doesn't reflect well on their client. And so I think it's part of my job is to do everything I can to try to make sure that, the jury is comfortable, that the jury, you try to read the room. Are they uncomfortable? Do they need a break? Is one of them falling asleep? Right? You have to really keep your eye on it because it's so important and you are in control to some extent of the courtroom. And so while the judge is the one that's really in control and has the right to be able to say, ladies and gentlemen, let's go take a break. You can certainly signal. You can say, Judge, seems like we might need to take a break, and kind of look over at the jury and they'll be like, oh, what did I miss? But they'll respond to you. And so I think that we have a responsibility to not be a jerk, right? You don't want to be a jerk to anybody in the courtroom, or I can't imagine why anyone would ever act that way. Because you really need the jury to at least not dislike you. They don't have to love you, but they can't dislike you.
So you won nearly 4 times the insurance company's last offer in your first post-pandemic jury trial in Frederick County. What happened in that courtroom to create
That was
that
the
result?
duck case, actually.
Oh, that was the duck
Yeah,
case.
that was the duck case. Okay, I do want to tell you one other fun story about that case. So, this is so fascinating. My client was like very handy, like just a super, could kind of one of these guys that could just do anything. And he was just a really, really cool and nice person. After the crash, his dentures were damaged. And so he literally, like I said to the jury, he whittled himself a new set of teeth. And they weren't wood, but like he literally sort of pieced back together, glued back together, like as best he could, the dentures that had been broken in this crash. And he wore them that way. I don't remember now the timeline, but he wore them that way for something like close to a year or a year and a half before he could save enough money to actually replace them. And so because he had whittled them back together, his mouth didn't shut exactly right. And so he couldn't chew in front of anyone. So he was like isolating himself like at the company lunches, and like he wouldn't go out to eat with anyone. And he was just very, he really was very self-conscious about this. And when he told me this story, it really upset me because I was like, no one should be left in a position where they can't, eat socially because they can't afford to have their teeth fixed because an insurance company doesn't want to pay an appropriate amount of money to make this man whole. So I said, you don't still happen to have those dentures, do you? And he's like, well, yeah, I do. And I said, bring them. And I passed them around the jury room. I literally passed them around the jury. And I was like, look at these teeth that he like whittled back together. And it was very powerful. So that was pretty neat. It was pretty neat.
Yeah, that would be a great story. So you also have provided pro bono representation to domestic violence victims through Legal Services of Northern Virginia. What does that look like, and how much time does that consume?
That's something I'm like super passionate about. I know I've been doing that for at least 10 years. I think it might even be longer at this point. So once every quarter, I am the attorney of the day for a program that's called Attorney of the Day. It's through Legal Services of Northern Virginia. And I was actually on the formation committee way back when this program started to help recruit other lawyers to help volunteer for these people who definitely and desperately usually need a protective order. So anyone who is being abused by their spouse, significant other, or a co-parent of a child, I represent them in court pro bono, getting them protective orders from whoever their spouse, ex-partner. I mean, there's any multitude of relationships from their abusers. And it's really important work to me. I'm very passionate about it. I just had 2 trials very recently. And it makes for a really interesting day because all the trials are back to back. And so you can be in the courtroom and then suddenly you're being called in another courtroom for your other trial. And you're like, I can't be in 2 places at once. So it can be a really interesting endeavor. But I love helping people, that are in that position and needing help. And man, talk about rewarding work. That is very rewarding.
So it seems like, it's just always so bizarre to me that actually occurs in the numbers that it actually occurs in, just because I don't know anybody that's in that situation. I don't know that I know anybody. How often is it kind of like kept secret where there's not bruises showing, but there's still the abuse going on, and nobody in the community knows? It's just between the husband and wife, and it's kind of like under the radar.
It happens all the time. I have been so honored that, some of these women who've been, and it's not always women. I recently, when I was just in one of those trials, it was a man. And actually his wife had assaulted him and caused his face to bleed. So I don't want to say women as if that's the only, gender that can be abused, because that would not be accurate. But what I will say is that the victims sometimes have been enduring it for years before they are able to sort of have the power and the wherewithal to come forward and say, I'm not going to take this anymore. And it is so brave. Because most of them, frankly, are in fear for their lives. The ones where the abuse is serious, they fear that this could, that by telling anyone, and it goes under the radar for years. That they could be hurt, they could be, abused again, and a lot of them end up going to shelters. I've helped several people that have been living in shelters while their case is pending with their children. And that's just, it's like a terrible circumstance. I don't think anybody is like, I can't wait to leave this relationship so that I can go live in, a sheltered for battered women with my children. Nobody wants that. So
Yeah.
it's a really tough decision to leave. And I give them all the credit for being incredibly brave.
Yeah, my son worked at a shelter for battered women. Anyway, you recently moved from Briglia Hundley to Blankenship and Keith as a principal. What drew you to this new position? I don't know how long ago that was. Maybe I don't have my research exactly right.
So I've been at Blankingship and Keith for more than 3 years, I think, coming up
Okay, so
very closely.
that's not really recently, but
It's been a while. What I love about this firm is, number one, I'm surrounded by like the legends of the practice of law in Northern Virginia. So it's really fun to walk down the hallways and be like, oh, I've heard about this attorney. I really felt like I was like really, really blessed the first few weeks that I was here, because every day I was like encountering a new attorney in the hallway that I had only heard about, right? But never met in person. And now I get to work alongside all of them, and it's incredible. One of the greatest things about working at Blankingship and Keith as a plaintiff's attorney doing personal injury work is that the firm is able to support us financially. So a lot of firms, they can't or won't front the costs for personal injury litigation, and it can be very expensive. It is
people
not,
don't know that.
Yeah, it is not uncommon for us to spend $100,000 to $200,000 in hard costs on a case, and so basically we're gambling with that money, right? So we may or may not make a recovery and be able to recoup those costs. And so we're really, really lucky that our partners support what we do and are willing to sort of put that money up front because it is not guaranteed. And so that's just a huge advantage that we have.
Yeah, because there's a lot of firms that there's special firms that finance
Right.
personal injury, and they're gambling instead, but then they take a cut out of everything too. So,
That's
um,
right. And
yeah,
and that costs the client more.
right.
Because they have to endure the costs of the interest and all those sorts of things. And like you said, they get a cut of it too.
If someone's been in an accident and they're watching this right now, what's the one thing they should do before they call any lawyer?
I would come up with a list of questions regarding the lawyer's experience and background. So let's just say it is a victim of a trucking crash. You should find out how many trucking crashes has the attorney that you're thinking about hiring have they handled? What were the results? I would really encourage people to do their research, do their background checking. And the other thing I would say is almost everyone knows a lawyer. I like to think that most people know a lawyer. So even if it's a lawyer in a different area of law, call the lawyer that you know and say, who would you hire for this particular circumstance? Because I think that you get higher quality information from other lawyers than you do from, for example, just a Google search. There's a lot of information out there. It can almost be information overload, but you're not looking for the attorney who can market the best. You're looking for the attorney who can handle the case the best. And so I think you'll get that information by asking other attorneys in the community.
Well, great. So if somebody wants to find you, connect with you, reach out, they need help, where would they look for Amy Bradley? Here's
Well,
your plug.
our website is blankingshipandkeith.com. And you also, anyone that was actually looking to speak with me, they can certainly give me a call. Obviously, I am only licensed to practice law in Virginia, Maryland, and DC. But our telephone number here is 703-293-7222.
Okay, well, thanks for coming on. Thanks so much for tuning in today. If you have a suggestion for a guest for our show, email us at support@trustcastshow.com and we'll get the conversation started.